Good morning, everybody. We're going to start with the first plenary session of the 15th World Economy Meeting that we have the honor to host in Santander, Cantabria for the first time. First of all, I would like to thank and congratulate Professor Diaz, his team, the University of Cantabria, for the good work done. I am sure, as it was said yesterday, that this conference will be a sound success. I would also like to greet all the people who are coming from abroad to visit Santander and Cantabria, and I would like to introduce the person who is with me this morning, Ínigo Urresti. He works at the European Commission at the General Directorate for Industry and Enterprise, and at the Unit of Strategic Policies. When Professor Diaz told me about this meeting, we both thought it would be a good idea to have somebody from the EU, and that it would be also interesting to talk about the EU. We would be tempted to talk about this issue everybody's talking about now, which is the economic and financial crisis, the reaction capacity of the EU before this crisis, the different regulations and the different legislation that is being applied, the six-pack, the two-pack, in order to face this crisis, in order to build an economic pillar for the monetary union. But we're not going to do that. We're going to talk about all the things that are happening in Europe right now too. These things are happening in this particular year, 2013, which is the end of a budgetary period, 2007-2013, and the beginning of a new financial framework from 2014 to 2020. When we talk about a financial framework, we talk about political ambition, what the EU wants to do in the next 7 years. Where do we want to allocate the resources the EU will have in the next 7 years? There are several terms and concepts that appear in almost all the political speeches of the EU right now, no matter who speaks, whether it is the Commissioner for Environment, for Enterprise, or for Regional Policy. Concepts such as smart specialization, innovation, research, development of entrepreneurship, internationalization, all these concepts are present in almost every project and every proposal for programs and regulations of the EU for the next period. If there is a key general directorate for the next years at the EU, that is, in my opinion, the DG Industry and Enterprise, represented today by Ínigo Urresti. They are applying a lot of programs and policies that are going to help us come out of this crisis and position Europe as an industrial power. He will talk about industrial policies in the EU. And I think that, well, he's the best person to tell us about what is being done at his General Directorate. So my introduction just wants to underline from somebody like me who firmly believes in the EU. I think that the economic crisis has shown us the weaknesses of the EU, and that's why now we are adopting all these urgent legislation packages. But I believe that the EU will be stronger after the crisis, and these policies that we are going to hear today will help us in this line. So I give the floor to Ínigo Urresti. I thank him very much for being here today. Thank you very much, Inma, Professor Diaz. Well, first of all, I would like to thank the government of Cantabria, in particular Inma, Valencia, and Professor Diaz for this opportunity to be here today and talk about policies of growth. About 1 year ago, I was in Chile in a meeting preparing for the SLACWE conference, and I heard something which was interesting to me. Basically, a speech has to be just like a woman's miniskirt. It has to be broad enough to cover all the issues and narrow enough to be interesting for everybody. I really hope to do something similar today. We have an hour ahead of us. I'll try to give you some hints about what Inma said. I'm going to talk about growth policies. Unfortunately, I have to begin by reminding you that we are living in difficult times. The last projections of the Commissions are very gloomy. There's no growth foreseen for the Eurozone for the next year. And now it seems to work better. Okay, so as I was saying, no growth is foreseen for 2013 in all the Eurozone. We believe that maybe in 2014 we can start recovering. We also come from 6 consecutive quarters of negative growth. So the situation is particularly bad. The inner demand is very low. The unemployment rate in Spain is absolutely terrible, but this is happening also in Europe. The unemployment in Europe is over 12%, and that is a very worrying figure. But I'm not going to talk about figures and negative numbers today only. I'm not going to focus on all these bad news we hear all the time. I'm going to talk about 2 fundamental issues that are the driver of our activities at the General Directorate. I'm going to talk about growth, entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs from Europe and from Spain in particular. You may wonder if we can talk about entrepreneurs today. Maybe you're wondering if this is the best time to be an entrepreneur. And I have to say, yes, we cannot forget that more than half of the companies of the Fortune 500 index were created in times of crisis. It's true that entrepreneurs were the first victims of the crisis. But without any doubt, they are going to be the drivers that will take us out of this crisis. The big companies of the future do exist. They are already here, maybe in this very same room. We don't know them yet, but they are overcoming the current difficulties, and they're going to take up the opportunities that they have in the present in order to grow in the future. Now I'm going to focus on the lessons we've learned from this crisis. As you know, we've been in this crisis for 5 years. Although there was some pause during 2010, we're still in the middle of the crisis with negative figures. And the lessons we've learned is one of the things I'm going to talk about, as well as our lines of action. Well, this crisis left us some important lessons. First of all is that industry is important, and I underline the word industry. Industry has been more resistant to the crisis than other sectors such as construction or services. The countries, and not only the countries, but the regions that have been more resistant to the crisis were those with a stronger industrial basis. Industry provides 80% of European exports. It represents 75% of all the investment on research and development in Europe from the private sector, and every employment in the industry sector creates an additional job in the related service sector. Without industry, Europe won't be able to recover its industrial capacity, but it won't be able to recover its economic capacity either. Therefore, a goal that we have set to ourselves, and that was repeated many times by the Vice President Tajani, is that we have to set a new goal within the strategy Europe 2020. We have to add one more 20, because we have to make industry to represent 20% of European GDP in 2020. This is feasible. Actually, in the 90s, the industry was more than 20% of the GDP. In the last 20 years, we've experienced an important desindustrialization process, and now we are partially paying the consequences of that process. The second lesson has to do with the results of the growth model of this last year. Growth based on bubbles and speculation leads to the deepest crisis. Someone said that January is a bad month for speculation, and the rest are February and then October, November, and December. Now the growth has no cycles. You know the results, which are very clear now. I remember that not long ago, some people said that the best industrial policy was to have no industrial policy at all. And today we're realizing that actually the most active regions from the industrial point of view are the ones who are enduring better these circumstances, and some of them actually have a very good competitive advantage with regard to our international competitors. So the conclusion is clear. If we need to grow, if we want to grow sustainable, we need real and productive economy. I refer one more time to Commissioner Tajani, who said that the real economy has to be the center of the priorities of all politicians. Maybe this is one of the small positive aspects that we can get from this crisis. Now all the institutions are starting to realize that we have to be based on a real economy, on fostering SMEs, entrepreneurship, and industry. However, we are in a series of circumstances where we don't have any resources. How can we base a new reindustrialization in Europe? Well, the key is innovation. Innovation is the only solid weapon we have to face the competition from emerging countries such as China, India, and the other BRICS. It's obvious that we cannot compete with these countries based on prices and cost strategies. That's suicidal for Europe. The only way we can compete and succeed in international marketing is by creating products and services with the great added value. So innovation is key for a sustainable, smart, integrating and sustainable growth. According to our research, Europe invests about 2.03% in innovation. The figure is not too bad. We are not at the top. The figure is much higher in Japan or the States, but the gap is being reduced, is being considerably reduced, even in these times of crisis. And this is important. However, there are some elements we have to bear in mind. First of all, the gap between Europe and China is also being substantially reduced. China is growing in research and development very rapidly, and they can reach the same level as Europe by 2030 or 35. So, if the average in Europe is 2%, there are very important discrepancies within the EU. We have countries such as Sweden, Finland, or Germany who are world leaders. Their investment rates are even higher than those of the States or Japan. There is this first group, and then there is a second group, which is around 2%. That's where we would put Holland or Great Britain. And then we have another group of moderates, innovation groups. That's where Spain is. 1.4% of investment on research and development. We are realizing that this gap it is vital to close it. And there is one more additional concept here. What is the main difference between Germany and Spain? The Spanish ratio in research and development from the public sector is not bad, is not far away from the EU average. However, from the private sector, there seems to be a problem. The gap is a lot bigger. However, in Germany, 80% of the companies declare that in the last 3 years they've been involved in some kind of innovation activity. This figure is only 40% in Spain. That is the difference. And that is the element that is behind competitiveness. Therefore, investment on innovation is one of our priorities. Last year we published a report with our priorities, and we've selected 6 technology groups that will help us recover, keep, and even grow our competitive advantages. These are the key enabling technologies, nanotechnology, etc. One more is biotechnology, the advanced manufacturing technologies, construction and raw materials, cars, automotion, electric vehicles, and new public transport systems, and smart grids. These are the 6 drivers that have to create the base for innovation and to produce growth. For each of these groups, we've created a task force to monitor all these elements. We're working both with the public and the private sector, and we hope to publish our first report after the summer with the first recommendations on what are the steps that need to be done from the European Union and from the member states, with very concrete and specific measures so that these policies are transformed into real measures. And that is the key point now. Investment. Who has to invest and on what? Well, first of all, it's the private sector. Entrepreneurs have to decide on the investment conditions, and from the institutions we have to foster a framework that favours investment and knowledge. But in the end of the day, it's the companies which are responsible for this. And this vision is better at a regional level. That is why we are here, because we are more aware of the needs and the realities of each region. In this framework, our cohesion policy has moved towards specialization in the programming of the new structural funds. So, as Inma was saying, from next year, our policies are going to be a lot more aligned. We have structural funds, we have innovation funds, which were on FP7 and will be now on Horizon 2020. We are going to make considerable efforts from the European Union so that all these measures are complementary. The idea is that we don't need any more roads, any more motorways or airports. We need to launch industrial competitiveness. All the efforts and all the funds are going to be targeted to increasing competitiveness, increasing innovation, and trying to make SMEs grow. The third lesson is that we need more Europe. We live in a global world, very competitive world, and there is no step back. So, in order to move forward, we have to internationalize companies, in particular SMEs. So, in this line, 1 out of 4 companies in Europe exports, but less than 1 goes beyond the European borders, and we need to work more on this. As you well know, the whole growth of the world's GDP is taking place beyond Europe, so not considering internationalization is suicidal. By 2030, according to our estimations, about 60% of the world's GDP will be on the emergent economies. So this is the time in which our companies have to move out, go to other markets, fight for those markets, and position themselves in those markets that are going to guarantee their sustainability on the long term. And Europe is the best passport for that. I can assure you that the Vice President Tajani has created a new concept, which is the missions for growth, and he is traveling with entrepreneurs to almost all the Latin American countries, north of Africa, the United States. In 10 days, he'll be in Russia. In July, he's going to Chile. He's also going to travel to Southeast Asia, Vietnam. It is paramount, and the EU is strongly supporting that, to support internationalization. We need more Europe and a better Europe. It's true that the crisis has shown problems in the design and governance of the monetary union. We've worked a lot on that, and we've strengthened the structures to have better results, which are now bearing fruit. In the last few months, there has been reasonable discussion about whether to take austerity or growth policies. From the EU, we think it is a false debate because both elements are fundamental. Without readjustment policies and long-term stability policies, we wouldn't be creating a sustainable basis to build a strong economy for the long term. However, maybe we've talked too much and only about adjustments and austerity, and the result of that is that we're going to create a basis, but they are not going to generate growth. Growth is not going to come from macroeconomic policies or the adjustment of deficit. This will come from growth policies, from the support to SMEs, from having more entrepreneurs and more international companies. These are the elements that are going to create wealth and employment, and that will help us overcome the crisis. Europe has some advantages. We talk a lot about weaknesses and difficulties, but Europe is in a privileged position. In spite of the emergence of emerging countries and their growth, Europe has been able to keep 20% of the market share in the world's trade. And not even Japan or the US was able to do that. However, in Europe, we have a trade superávit, an enormous trade superávit. And in terms of added value, Europe has a privileged position. More than 22% of the world's trade and more than 28% of the income generated on this planet. This means that Europe is competitive and it is succeeding in international markets. Compared with other regions, our industry is competitive, and the proof is where we are on the international scale. That's where you can show if you are capable to compete. The situation in Spain is complicated, but it is changing, and there are some hints of hope. After the central bank's statement last September, there's been a huge change. The huge capital flows to international markets are being now reduced, and capital is coming in, as well as foreign investment, which is coming in to Spain. So one of the most important stabilization elements are being confirmed now. Labor costs have also been reduced by 10%. The situation of the banking sector has been stabilized, but the most important thing for Spain now is that Spain is now starting to have superávits in the trade balance. I think this is the first time we get this in all the historical series. So this is starting to work, but there are some risks involved. Now I'm going to focus more on the policies of on SMEs. And Europe needs to improve in many things, and Spain in particular. In our policy, we have three lines to be followed. What the SMEs needs, which is a reduction of bureaucracy, access to finance, and internationalization. Those are the three pillars needed by SMEs right now. In Spain, a lot of efforts are being made in order to simplify the administration procedures, but according to our research, Spain is one of the worst in terms of costs and time to open or set up a new business. It's true that a company can be set up quite quickly, but when the company starts working, it needs to get a lot of licenses and permissions, and that is very problematic in Spain. Spain is not in a very good position in this regard. There's something important to remark here. From the European Commission, we tried to play by our example, and we have eliminated more than 7,000 pages of the official diaries of the European Community, and I would love to see similar actions in some of the member states. A government's capacity is not measured by the number of laws that they create, but by the number of laws they eliminate. In England, they have this criterion of for each rule that is created, one more has to disappear, one in, one out. Maybe next year they will start with the concept of one in, two out. So this might imply a change in the way we plan all the administrative burdens. The other problem I was telling you about was the access to loans. The loans have decreased from 60% to 40% of the bank's liabilities. In Spain, and in all European countries, but in particular in the southern countries, the situation in this regard is particularly difficult. We are working with several elements. We have guarantees, we have risk capital funds, and why? Regardless of the policies from the European Central Bank and the European Investment Bank, there is a fundamental issue. In Europe, basically, 80% of the company's finance or funding comes from the banks. In the US, the figure is 20%, so it is exactly the opposite. A few months ago, I heard some relevant figures. The average investment of risk capital in Spain is $3 per inhabitant. In the European Union, the figure is $10, and in the US, it is 70. We have to start thinking about how to diversify the financing sources, trying to look for other real alternatives in order to avoid having the same problems as we had. And another important problem is the credit guarantees. We're working on that through programs which are supporting SMEs in this regard. We're starting working also on the crowdfunding initiatives, including business angels initiatives. We're working very hard with member states to work in this regard too. So today I'm going to tell you a little bit about our priorities in terms of contributing to a policy of growth. First of all, we need to create more business. We need all the potential we have in Europe to grow, and we have to make it easy. We have set a very simple goal that is now working, and the idea is to create a company with 100 euros and maximum in 3 days. This was practically science fiction a few years ago, but now it's becoming a reality in many states. In some of the countries, this can be done online and with no costs at all. In Spain, there are some projects trying to move on in this direction. But why am I insisting on this? We've been researching this from the year 2000 on entrepreneurship. There are many questions trying to find out which are the drivers and the barriers to entrepreneurship. The first question is very simple. What would you like to be, an entrepreneur or work for somebody else? In 2000, more than half of Europeans preferred or wanted to be an entrepreneur. In that same year, 2 out of 3 Spaniards preferred to be entrepreneurs than employees. We've been in that trend for all these years, but now only 30% of Europeans prefer being an entrepreneur than an employee, and in Spain it is only 1 out of 3. So we've changed. We used to be one of the countries with a higher spirit of enterprise, and now we are one of the least. In some other countries, including the US and China, these figures are the opposite. Almost everybody is motivated towards entrepreneurship. And here we are risking to lose a whole generation of entrepreneurs. If we don't have entrepreneurs, we don't have business, and if we don't have business, we don't have jobs. So the question is quite easy. That's why we've launched program supporting entrepreneurship called Entrepreneurship 2020, and we are working in particular on those drivers which are trying to support entrepreneurs. There's a curious fact. Some people say that entrepreneurs are born natural, but we believe that's not necessarily so. In our office in Brussels, we can see that in Denmark they have this program of micro companies that they've been working on for 30 years, and already at secondary education they provide a program trying to teach students how to develop and maintain a company. And with this program, they have monitored what happened to all these children who followed the program during secondary education. And what they have seen is that between 15 and 20% of the students who followed that program created their own company, and even today, they run their own companies. The average in Europe is 5% only. A normal European citizen has only 5% of possibilities of becoming an entrepreneur, whether the ones who've followed this program, the figure is 15 to 20%. So, in my opinion, that is the best place we can put our money, education, because that generates entrepreneurs and companies, and in the end that creates jobs. As I was saying, we are working very hard on simplifying the administrative procedures. Up to now, we've studied the regulations we had so far and how to simplify them. And what we are doing now is trying to implement impact tests and also the SMEs test. That is, any legislation coming from Europe has to pass these two tests. If they don't pass these tests, the legislation will be withdrawn. They will be withdrawn. We've done two more things. The first one, we've made a proposal which was called the 10 worst online. So we've made a survey trying to find out which were the 10 worst things done by the EU for the enterprise, and we've received thousands of responses on that. We are going to change a lot of things, starting by the WICH directive, which has to do with chemical products. We're going to start working on simplification so that SMEs can access more easily to this rich directive. There's one more conclusion, which says that from January 1st, 2012, for companies with less than 10 employees, we invert the load. This means that it is the administration that the one that has to show why regulation has to be applied to an SMEs with less than 10 employees. So we are going to exonerate small companies and micro companies from unnecessary legislation. Finally, the access to finance is urgent. The crisis has shown us the vulnerability of economies. I was telling you about the actions we are taking, which are targeted towards developing alternative markets. It's true that we're also working on other initiatives, including fostering the SMEs' participation in capital markets. We are launching directives so that SMEs are a lot faster and a lot more cost-effective in order to enter international markets by adapting all the requirements and all the processes that they need to go through. So that, well, the final goal is that their participation in alternative markets is improved. And one more thing that I could conclude with, because it is quite recent, is the directive against morosity. We've launched it from our Directorate General, and it says that any public authority has to pay its debts, its invoices, in 30 days maximum, and that's it. And for the private companies, unless the companies agree otherwise, invoices have to be paid in 60 days maximum. From March 16th, 2013, this directive was in force. We are going to monitor this so that we can see if all member states are following this, because I am assuring you that there's going to be zero tolerance here, because we know that morosity is very negative, has a very negative impact on SMEs. 1 out of 4 companies that go bankrupt in Europe go bankrupt because they are not paid timely. So this measure is trying to save SMEs and save the industry. By the end of 2012, the amount of unpaid debts was approximately 350,000 million euros. This equals the total of Greece's debt. So this has a terrible impact on SMEs. That's why we are going to work on that, so that SMEs don't have to suffer from a lack of access to credit, so that SMEs, aside of not having access to credit, so we don't want them to become the creditor, the founders of the states. So I'm going to go back to the beginning before I finish. In a recent report by McKinsey, it was said that the best asset of Europe was private investment, and private investment does not come from our analysis or from our reports. As Jack Welch, the legendary head of General Motors, said, innovation comes from the heart of an entrepreneur. Therefore, we have to create a trust environment so that investment comes back. We are working on that to build that trust, but that trust has to be built on real facts, based on the simplification of administration, readjustments, etc. These are difficult times, but I think that all together we can create the framework to re-establish trust, and with that, growth. Thank you very much.
No sé si esto funciona.
I don't know if this is working. Thank you very much, Ínigo. As I was saying in my introduction, Europe is living very difficult times, but as you can see, very ambitious policies are being applied from the European Union, and these measures need the cooperation of the states and the regions of the EU, because without their cooperation, that will be just a declaration of intentions. So I believe that, well, it's true that the EU is coordinating more and more its efforts, and all the general directorates are working in the same line. It's true that that coordination must be required from national and regional governments, so that the use of European national and regional funds are aligned, so that we can work for an inclusive and smart growth, because those are the pillars of the growth strategy 2020. I think we have some time for debate, not too much, because in 20 minutes Ínigo has to leave for the airport, but 15-20 minutes will be enough in case you have questions or reflections. So we want to listen to your opinions. You have the floor. I don't know if there is a microphone in the room.
Por allí había una pregunta.
There was a question back there. Can you hear me? Well, thank you for the intervention. It's very optimistic. It talks about the reindustrialization of Europe, and I agree with that. But in order to heat up the debate a little bit, I'm going to go a little bit against. You don't say to which extent the European Monetary Union has been, as Patrick Touche said, a machine of creating heterogeneities, and it has contributed to the disindustrialization of some countries, including France and Spain. That's the first point. The second point is that you stressed on the need of strengthening private investment, and I would agree with that. But how can we foster this private investment in economies that tend to stagnation with the policies that have been applied so far in Europe, which is true, that are now being revised, with still a huge debt of the private sector. So as you were saying, there are very important difficulties in accessing to funding, which are going to continue because they are derived from the recapitalization needs of the banks themselves. So now all the exits are kind of blocked, and I end up with this, because accessing to the capital market in order to break this bank intervention, it's true that the European capital market is fragmented, and the interest rate that can be required to Spanish, Portuguese or Italian companies have increased. I see a very generous speech, but it is not quite realistic, I think, because if the internal demand is so depressed, and the only good thing we have is exports. Here I have to say that even if exports were positive in Spain, this was due because the fall of exports was more important, but it wasn't due to our dynamism. Thank you. I don't know if there are any more questions. I'm sorry, but without a microphone, I cannot hear, I cannot translate. I totally agree that in Europe, in the regions and in the countries, we have to foster the real economy, innovation, and the diversification of credit sources. I agree with that. However, I see the Basque country, which is very close to here. It has very good indicators, very good results in general, but it is risking that it is creating a lot of companies, but these companies are not accessing credits. So in my opinion, one way out, it's important to stress and reinforce business angels, seed capitals, etc., because now most companies are being fed by conventional banks. It's true that in Cantabria, in Spain, in Europe, there's less money for companies, but the interest rates that are being paid here are a lot higher than in Germany. For example, the Deutsche Bank has a lot higher rates here in Spain than in Germany, and I think that is a fundamental problem. And I know that the solution to that is not going to come right away, but I would like to know what your opinion is in order to improve the internal market. One more questions, and maybe Ínigo can answer to all of them afterwards. Hello, good morning. My name is Agustin Datelis. I come from Argentina, and after listening to your presentation, I'm quite concerned with the analysis. In Argentina, we had a crisis with a huge unemployment rate, similar to the one that Spain has now. And it's true, we all share the idea that we need to recover investment in order to foster growth, but we disagree in the ways to do that, because nobody has considered about, or you haven't said or talked about reinforcing the internal supply. Because, well, a company that can be created in 3 days and with 100 euros, that is fantastic, but there is no demand from the internal market that is unrealistic. Because even if creating a company is very cheap, companies are not going to be created if they don't have a market to address to. Then you also talked about competitiveness and the fact that Europe does not have a problem in this regard, but I think that Germany is the only one which doesn't have competitive issues. There is a huge competitive issue in the rest of Europe. I think that the single currency showed that European economies are very different, and the labor costs are very different in the different countries. For example, between Germany and Spain. In Spain, labor costs have increased considerably, and that has created competitiveness issues. And that is shown in the interregional balances. And Germany and Spain cannot be compared in this regard. And coming back to the Argentinian case, I would like to make a last reflection. Are you really convinced that by keeping the single currency, you are going to restructure debts in the current circumstances, do you think that by that you're going to find the answer to economic growth in the mid and long term? We are going to take one last question. Thank you. Well, my question is in line with the previous ones. I would like to ask you specifically about Spain. What are competitive advantages in Spain? Because you are producing for the external market, but also for the internal market. And, well, public policies are planned to foster that competitiveness. You are saying that the regulations are changing, the funding regulations are changing, but I would like to know what is being done in order to foster demand. Because, well, fundamentally, SMEs produce for the internal markets. And I also would like to know, as I said before, what the competitiveness situation is now. And I would also like to make another question, which is this attitude of entrepreneurship. You were saying that the Spanish entrepreneurship sector is quite conservative in terms of innovation, and the attitude or the motivation to create business has been reduced. How can you explain that? What is the reason for that change in attitudes? Why does Spain have a moderate attitude towards innovation and entrepreneurship? Thank you. Well, there are a lot of issues on the table. I'll try to cover them all at once, but if I forget something, please remind me. First of all, I would like to say that whilst you were saying there's no level playing field for companies. That's true. And that's a reason of concern, because it's creating a real risk of breaking the internal market. The capacities and the financing costs in Germany have nothing to do with the Spanish case. In Spain, the companies which get finance from banks have to pay 3 more points of interest than German companies, and that is concerning. We are taking all the measures we can in the short term, which is trying to support with funds by guarantees. We have several instruments. We are acting by the European Investment Bank, trying to offer guarantees through local financial agencies. So the EU is being the guarantor for those credits. We have this competitiveness and innovation program, which allocates 60% of all its funds to provide bank guarantees. In the last 7 years, with the funding of this program, we've supported 220,000 companies, and we hope that by the end of next year, this figure grows to 315,000. Out of those, 55,000 were Spanish. Considering that there are 27 countries, this means that 25% of the guarantees from the EU have come to Spain. And this is, well, not a reason to congratulate ourselves, but the Microcaixa Bank and CEPSA have also supported us in this. But the European Union is what it is. Our budget doesn't even reach 1% of the total GDP, and we don't have huge instruments to launch that funding. We are working very hard with the European Central Bank. We have been insistent as we can, but the European Central Bank works as a bank. They are very conservative and they are trying very hard to preserve their AAA. And in the board of the European Central Bank, we have the member states. We are working so that the European Central Bank and the European Investment Bank work more in this direction. Honestly, now we cannot say that the European Investment Bank will give a huge amount of credit, but we have achieved something. Last year, a capital increase was approved of 10,000 million, and 25% of that was allocated to credits for SMEs. And there is an important multiplying effort. This additional money is going to allow the European Central Bank to give credit of 15,000 million to the financial sector, and that can represent 70,000 additional million to the business sector. So we're trying to strengthen as many lines as we can. Somebody also said that the euro had discouraged investment. Well, it's true that the effects of the euro can be seen now, because all the European countries are not in the same situation. In some countries, the word crisis doesn't say anything, doesn't mean anything. For example, Austria or Germany. And even if the perspectives are not very good, compared to Spain, the situation is a lot better. But what happened in Germany? Let's try to see things step by step. When the euro was born, it didn't have a lot of mechanisms which are actually belonging to a single currency. The euro doesn't have an instrument for banking control, as in the US, and there is not a common fiscal or tax policy. That's true. And these elements have exacerbated even more the situation we're in now. But we cannot forget that behind all this, there have been political decisions in the member states. It's true that the southern countries were used to weaker currencies, and they've even abused devaluation in order to gain competitiveness. And our inflation rates were sometimes 15, 20, or 25%. And once our currencies were not competitive, well, we devaluated them and no problem. What happened here is that the Europe has not been totally assumed in many countries. And we cannot manage interest rates of 3% when our interest rates used to be about 15%. That's why maybe we didn't make the right decisions. It's true that in Spain we have to pay these prices, but in Germany there was a huge internal conversion process. You may remember all the actions that Germany took after the reunification, trying to refrain labor costs They've worked very hard to keep and to foster competitiveness. When Germany started being part of the Europe, it wasn't in the best situation, but they understood that for the euro to be successful, labor costs had to be competitive. Maybe in Spain we didn't have that vision. We only saw the good part of the euro. And it has been hard to adapt to a strong currency that cannot be devalued. And which, as I was saying, it is a strong currency with regard to the dollar. But what happens in Spain now is that everything is coming together now. The mistake was made basically here. These may be harsh words. I'll try to be moderate. But maybe easy credit has led us to invest on sectors were not very productive. We've also facilitated the bursting of the real estate bubble, and we didn't take any measures to stop this process. And this didn't happen in all the countries. So we had a growth rate that was backed by a growth very closely linked to some sectors only. Now Spain is gaining competitiveness. We have important competitive companies. And it's true that not all the companies that went bankrupt were linked to the construction sector. But it's true that a lot of companies are being shut down now. However, there are many competitive companies that allow us to have this high export ratio. It's true that imports are falling down, and that is a clear indicator of the crisis. However, we cannot forget that Spain is exporting now around 22-23% of the GDP. These are important figures we didn't have for a long time. Of course, we cannot compare ourselves to Germany. Germany exports about 50% of its GDP. So the real internationalization of German companies is a lot higher than the Spanish one. And they've been in this position for a long time. I think that in Spain we have about 3.5 million companies, of which 100,000 are real exporters. And the companies which export more than 50,000 euros, well, the figure is only 50,000 companies. We were in good times where the internal demand was huge, and we were not very concerned about keeping competitiveness and accessing international markets. And now we are in the middle of a process where we need to make readjustments at the European and at the Spanish levels. That's why we are working on many different measures. Inma was talking about the two-pack, and I'm sure that that is not going to be the only step to be taken. The euro needs all the natural instruments of a normal currency. It needs a better fiscal integration. We are working on that, but we need the support of the member states for that. And as you know, that is quite hard to achieve right now because opinions are very divergent. When it comes to growth policies, yeah, it's true. We are not going to make Spain into Hollywood from one night to the next. That's not going to come overnight. In Europe, we have very advanced company we have a good competitive tissue, but not all our tissue is competitive. As I was saying before, a large part of growth in Spain has been associated to sectors which were not very productive. So what do we have to do? Access to finance is very important. We are working as hard as we can together with the member states. But I would insist on elements, for example, the simplification of regulations. That is paramount. We cannot forget what the Commission is and what the member states are. What we have to do, we have to make sure that there is a regulatory framework that fosters entrepreneurship. We try to reduce the administrative burdens as much as we can, and more importantly, we have to create a system allowing public companies, allow companies to do what they know what to do or how to do, to create jobs and create wealth. So we have to foster that so that the investment comes back. And being able to create a company in 3 days is not going to mean that everybody is going to create a company just like that. It's true, we need to increase the internal demand, and according to our estimations, growth is going to start by the beginning of next year, maybe a little bit sooner, but we have to build that internal demand. How can we encourage it? What we have to do is try to work in this direction, create these possibilities. Jobs or a greater demand is not going to come without new business, without a new incentivation cycle. That is the reality. Fostering, encouraging the system is an important idea. The financial bubbles that took us to this situation do not work anymore. And there is another element, which is restructuring. Why not? Restructuring debts. You saw that there was a first restructuring debt for Greece. And the debt was restructured when it was necessary. However, I insist, what we have to do in the end is take responsibilities in our capacities and in our sectors. For example, in the case of Greece, all the support was always under some conditions because we tried to make sure that this would not happen again. I don't know if I'm forgetting something. I hope not. Well, we don't have much time either. So I think we have to close this first plenary session. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming, and good luck with the Congress.